Hey guys, this is chapter 9 of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. For the first time in 3 nights, Okonkwo slept. He woke up once in the middle of the night and his mind went back to the past 3 days without making him feel uneasy. He began to wonder why he had felt uneasy at all. It was like a man wondering in broad daylight why a dream had appeared so terrible to him at night. He stretched himself and scratched his thigh where a mosquito had bitten him as he slept. Another one was wailing near his right ear. He slapped the ear and hoped he had killed it. Why do they always go for one's ears? When he was a child, his mother had told him a story about it, but it was as silly as all women's stories. Mosquito, she had said, had asked Ear to marry him, whereupon Ear fell on the floor in uncontrollable laughter. "How much longer do you think you will live?" she asked. "You are already a skeleton." Mosquito went away humiliated, and any time he passed her way, he told Ear that he was still alive. This chapter is kind of introducing a genre of storytelling called folk tales. And you might have heard of folk tales before, but basically they originated as verbal storytelling. And a lot of times with folk tales, they involve magic. Sometimes they involve talking animals. And the goal of them is always to convey some sort of implicit claim or underlying argument. And it's not directly stated. You always have to read between the lines to try to figure out what the argument is. In that regard, it's very similar to the book Things Fall Apart. So we're looking at the story and we're trying to ask ourselves what the author, Chinua Achebe, is trying to argue for us. The other thing with folk tales is a lot of times they are like the purpose of them is they're trying to prove why something happened, or they're trying to explain why something happened. Oftentimes it's a natural phenomenon. Folk tales are really, really old. They're from like the dawn of humanity. And so this was before we had like science. So folk tales would answer questions that people might have had about scientific things, like why is the sky blue? Why is it raining? Where did people come from? Why does the turtle's back have like lines on it? Why is it so rough? Anything that they had questions about in the natural world, a lot of times they would create folk tales to kind of explain it. So in this example of this story, Okonkwo's mom used to tell him it was about kind of why mosquitoes buzz near ears. Okonkwo turned on his side and went back to sleep. He was roused in the morning by someone banging on his door. "Who's that?" he growled. He knew it must be Akwefi. Of his 3 wives, Akwefi was the only one who would have the audacity to bang on his door. "Azima is dying," came her voice, and all the tragedy and sorrow of her life were packed in those words. Okonkwo sprang from his bed, pushed back the bolt on his door, and ran into Akwefi's hut. Azima lay shivering on a mat beside a huge fire that her mother had kept burning all night. This is really sad because we've had a lot of introduction to the character Azima. She is Okonkwo's favored child. In fact, we have witnessed conversations among other people in the tribe that have suggested that she is kind of a special human being. In fact, the Oracle was talking to her mom a few chapters back, and it sounds like her mom often lost children early, and they were hoping because Azima had made it alive for this long that she was here to stay, but now we find out that she's sick. "It is Iba," said Okonkwo as he took his machete and went into the bush to collect the leaves and grasses and barks of trees that went into making the medicine for Iba. Now, I think Iba, the definition for that is in the glossary in the back of the book, I believe. Let me just double check. Yes, it is. So Iba is fever, but you could probably figure that out based on context too. Akwefi knelt beside the sick child, occasionally feeling with her palm the wet, burning forehead. Azima was an only child in the center of her mother's world. Very often it was Azima who decided what food her mother should prepare. Akwefi even gave her such delicacies as eggs, which children were rarely allowed to eat because such food tempted them to steal. One day, as Azima was eating an egg, Okonkwo had come in unexpectedly from his hut. He was greatly shocked and swore to beat Akwefi if she dared to give the child eggs again. But it was impossible to refuse Azima anything. After her father's rebuke, she developed an even keener appetite for eggs, and she enjoyed above all the secrecy in which she now ate them. Her mother always took her into their bedroom and shut the door. Azinma did not call her mother Ni like all the children. She called her by her name, Akwefi, as her father and other grown-up people did. The relationship between them was not only that of mother and child. There was something in it like the companionship of equals, which was strengthened by such little conspiracies as eating eggs in the bedroom. These little details help to elicit pathos, which, if you recall, is a rhetorical appeal that helps us to feel emotion. So the author is trying to give us insights into little pieces of Azinma's life and her relationship with her mom, their special relationship, to try to make us feel something emotionally from this incident. Akwefi had suffered a good deal in her life. She had borne 10 children, and 9 of them had died in infancy, usually after the age of 3. As she buried one child after another, her sorrow gave way to despair and then to grim resignation, which means she started to just accept that every child she had would die. It was very sad. The birth of her children, which should be a woman's crowning glory, became for Akwefi mere physical agony devoid of promise. The naming ceremony after 7 market weeks became an empty ritual. Her deepening despair found expression in the names she gave her children. One of them was a pathetic cry, Onwambiko, which means death, I implore you. But death took no notice. Onwambiko died in his 15th month. The next child was a girl, Ozamina, which means may it not happen again. She died in her 11th month, and 2 others after her. Akwefi then became defiant and called her next child Onwuma, which means death may please himself, and he did. After the death of Akwefi's second child, Okonkwo had gone to a medicine man who was also a diviner of the Ifa oracle to inquire what was amiss. This man told him that the child was an Agbanji, one of those wicked children who, when they died, entered their mother's wombs to be born again. When your wife becomes pregnant again, he said, let her not sleep in her hut. Let her go away and stay with her people. In that way, she will elude her wicked tormentor and break its evil cycle of birth and death. Akwefi did just as she was asked. As soon as she became pregnant, she went to live with her old mother in another village. It was there that her third child was born and circumcised on the 8th day. She did not return to Okonkwo's compound until 3 days before the naming ceremony. The child was called Onwambiko. Onwambiko was not given proper burial when he died. Okonkwo had called in another medicine man who was famous in the clan for his great knowledge about Agbanji children. His name was Akagbu Uyanwa. Akagbu was a very striking figure, tall with a full beard and a bald head. He was light in complexion and his eyes were red and fiery. He always gnashed his teeth as he listened to those who came to consult him. He asked Okonkwo a few questions about the dead child. All the neighbors and relations who had come to mourn gathered round them. On what market day was he born? He asked. Oi, replied Okonkwo. That's a day of their week. And it died this morning? Okonkwo said yes, and only then realized for the first time that the child had died on the same market day as it had been born. The neighbors and relations also saw the coincidence and said among themselves that it was very significant. Where do you sleep with your wife? In your obi or in her own hut? Asked the medicine man. In her hut. In future, call her into your obi. The medicine man then ordered that there should be no mourning for the dead child. He brought out a sharp razor from the goatskin bag slung from his left shoulder and began to mutilate the child. This is hard to read. Then he took it away to bury in the evil forest, holding it by the ankle and dragging it on the ground behind him. Imagery is really important for you to experience what's happening here. After such treatment, it would think twice before coming again, unless it was one of the stubborn ones who returned, carrying the stamp of their mutilation, a missing finger, or perhaps a dark line where the medicine man's razor had cut them. Okay, so it sounds like there was a rationale to what the medicine man did, which is still hard to picture as a Westerner, as a somebody who lives in America. That's not from this culture, but the reason that he did this was because their belief was that it was one spirit that kept being reborn, okay, and dying. So it was like an evil child spirit that was being reborn and dying and coming back and dying and coming back to kind of torment the family. And so they treated the body of this dead child the way that they did to kind of scare off the spirit, and hopefully it would not come back again. And they mutilated the child because their belief was that if the child was reincarnated, if the child was born again, it would bear some scar from the mutilation, so they would be able to tell that that's what it was. By the time Onwumbiko died, Akwefi had become a very bitter woman. Her husband's first wife had already had 3 sons, all strong and healthy. When she had borne her 3rd son in succession, Okonkwo had slaughtered a goat for her, as was the custom. Akwefi had nothing but good wishes for her, but she had grown so bitter about her own chi that she could not rejoice with others over their good fortune. And so on the day that Nwoye's mother celebrated the birth of her 3 sons with feasting and music, Akwefi was the only person in the happy company who went about with a cloud on her brow. Her husband's wife took this for malevolence, as husbands' wives were wont to do. But could she know that Akwefi's bitterness did not? How could she know that Akwefi's bitterness did not flow outwards to others, but inwards into her own soul? That she didn't blame others for their good fortune, but her own evil chi, who denied her any. Again, we're seeing that these are people, these are human beings just like us, and we can relate to them. These miscomprehensions of other people's motivations, miscomprehensions of other people's emotions. A lot of times we perceive people's behaviors as being about us, when in actuality their behaviors are about something, some inner demon that they're fighting, some internal battle that they're fighting. At last, Azima was born, and although ailing, which means sick, she seemed determined to live. At first, Akwefi accepted her, as she had accepted others, with listless resignation. But when she lived on to her 4th, 5th, and 6th years, love returned once more to her mother, and with love, anxiety. She determined to nurse her child to health, and she put all her being into it. She was rewarded by occasional spells of health, during which Azima bubbled with energy like fresh palm wine. At such times, she seemed beyond danger. But all of a sudden, she would go down again. Everybody knew she was an Agbanji. These sudden bouts of sickness and health were typical of her kind, but she had lived so long that perhaps she had decided to stay. Some of them did become tired of their evil rounds of birth and death, or took pity on their mothers, and stayed. Akwefi believed deep inside her that Azima had come to stay. She believed because it was that faith alone that gave her own life any kind of meaning. And this faith had been strengthened when a year or so ago a medicine man had dug up Azima's Iyi Ua. Everyone knew then that she would live because her bond with the world of Agbanji had been broken. Akwefi was reassured. But such was her anxiety for her daughter that she could not rid herself completely of her fear. And although she believed that the Iyi Ua, which had been dug up, was genuine, she could not ignore the fact that some really evil child sometimes misled people into digging up a specious one. So it sounds like the people went back to the evil forest, which is where they bury these Agbanji evil children, and tried to dig up the bones of one of Akwefi's other children to make sure that that Azima is not one of the Agbanji. I think that's what it means. The word that they give us here is Iwa. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. That's it right there. And using context clues, it sounds like it is a skeleton. So I'm going to pop to the back. I'm going to see if it's in there. And if it's not, I'm just going to be like, yep, I think that's what it is. I could Google it if I wanted to. You can Google it if you want to. I don't see it on here. Let me make sure I have the spelling right. It's with an I. I did not. Good thing I double checked. Here it is. I was a little bit wrong. So it is actually a special kind of stone which forms the link between an Agabanji and the spirit world. Only if the Iiua were discovered and destroyed would the child not die. Interesting. So they found a stone and it sounds like they destroyed it, but it says sometimes Agbanji trick people into finding a stone that's not really the Iiua stone. So it's part of their like evil mischief. But Azinma's Iiua had looked real enough. It was a smooth pebble. Ooh, see, if we had just kept reading, we would have definitely found out what it is. Context clues, very important. It was a smooth pebble wrapped in a dirty rag. The man who dug it up was the same Akagbu who was famous in all the clan for his knowledge in these matters. Azinma had not wanted to cooperate with him at first, but that was only to be expected. No Agbanji would yield her secrets easily, and most of them never did because they died too young before they could be asked questions. Where did you bury your Uyi Ua? Akagbo had asked Azinma. She was 9 then and was just recovering from a serious illness. This sounds awful. So we have this 9-year-old girl. She was really ill, and now like this medicine man is like questioning her, like, where did you bury your evil stone, child? She's probably like, ah. So as you can expect, the child asks, what is Iiua? She asks in return. You know what it is. You buried it in the ground somewhere so that you can die and return again to torment your mother. Poor child. Azinma looked at her mother, whose eyes, sad and pleading, were fixed on her. Answer the question at once, roared Okonkwo, who stood beside her. All the family were there and some of the neighbors too. Leave her to me, the medicine man told Okonkwo in a cool, confident voice. He turned again to Azinma. Where did you bury your Iiua? Okay, now this is interesting because she actually responds to him. She says, where they bury children, she replied, and the quiet spectators murmured to themselves. My question for you, do you think that she is an Agbanji evil child spirit and she does know where her Iiua stone is? Or do you think that she is a 9-year-old child who is really scared, doesn't know what's happening, trusts the people around her, including her mom and her dad, and so she's telling them what she thinks they want to hear? Think about that. What do you think? Come along then and show me the spot, said the medicine man. The crowd set out with Azinma leading the way, and Akagbu followed closely behind her. Okonkwo came next, and Akwefi followed him. When she came to the main road, Azinma turned left as if she were going to the stream. But you said it was where they bury children, asked the medicine man. No, said Azinma, whose feeling of importance was manifest in her sprightly walk. She sometimes broke into a run and stopped again suddenly. The crowd followed her silently. Women and children returning from the stream with pots of water on their heads wondered what was happening until they saw Kagbu and guessed that it must be something to do with Agbanji. And they all knew Akwefi and her daughter very well. So it kind of sounds like for Azinma, this is becoming a game. When she got to the big udala tree, Azinma turned left into the bush and the crowd followed her. Because of her size, she made her way through trees and creepers more quickly than her followers. The bush was alive with the tread of feet on dry leaves and sticks and the moving aside of tree branches. Azinma went deeper and deeper, and the crowd went with her. Then she suddenly turned around and began to walk back to the road. Everybody stood to let her pass and then filed after her. If you bring us all this way for nothing, I shall beat sense into you, Okonkwo threatened. I have told you to let her alone. I know how to deal with them, said Akagbu. Azima led the way back to the road, looked left and right, and turned right, and so they arrived home again. "Where did you bury your Iuwa?" asked Akogbu when Azima finally stopped outside her father's obi. Akogbu's voice was unchanged. It was quiet and confident. "It is near that orange tree," Azima said. "And why did you not say so, you wicked daughter of Akakului?" Okonkwo swore furiously. The medicine man ignored him. "Come and show me the exact spot," he said quietly to Azima. "It is here," she said when they got to the tree. "Point at the spot with your finger," said Akogbu. "It is here," said Azima, touching the ground with her finger. Okonkwo stood by, rumbling like thunder in the rainy season. Ooh, fire and water imagery again. Thunder, of course, coming from lightning, which is fire. In a rainy season, definitely significance to that. "Bring me a hoe," said Akogbu. When Ikwefi brought the hoe, he had already put aside his goatskin bag and his big cloth and was in his underwear. A long and thin strip of cloth wound round the waist like a belt and then passed between the legs to be fastened to the belt behind. He immediately set to work digging a pit where Azima had indicated. The neighbors sat around watching the pit becoming deeper and deeper. The dark topsoil soon gave way to the bright red earth with which women scrubbed the floors and walls of huts. Akogbu worked tirelessly and in silence, his back shining with perspiration. Okonkwo stood by the pit. He asked Akogbo to come and rest while he took a hand, but Akogbo said he was not tired yet. Ikwefi went into her hut to cook yams. Her husband had brought out more yams than usual because the medicine man had to be fed. Azima went with her and helped in preparing the vegetables. "There is too much green vegetable," she said. "Don't you see the pot is full of yams?" Ikwefi asked. "And you know how leaves become smaller after cooking?" "Yes," said Azima. "That was why the snake lizard killed his mother." "Very true," said Ikwefi. "He gave his mother 7 baskets of vegetables to cook, and in the end there were only 3, and so he killed her," said Azima. "That's not the end of the story." "Oh," said Azima. "I remember now. He brought another 7 baskets and cooked them himself, and there were again only 3, so he killed himself too." So they're referencing another folktale, a story about somebody who gets in trouble because obviously when you cook vegetables, they get smaller, they shrink. So this snake lizard thinks that somebody has taken some of his vegetables because he started out with 7 baskets, but then after they were cooked, the vegetables only filled 3 baskets. So he killed his mother, and then he tried it himself. And the irony here, this is really morbid, sad, dark irony, is that the same thing, of course, happened to him when he cooked 7 baskets worth of vegetables. They shrank to only 3 baskets full, and he killed himself. This is a story that kind of is designed to represent what is happening in the book. So the Igbo people they're banking on this truth that Azima is one of these evil children spirits, but they're really not following what the author perceives as logic. So the story, the folktale reference kind of emphasizes that fallacy. Outside the obi, Akogbu and Okonkwo were digging the pit to find where Azima had buried her Iuwa. Neighbors sat around watching. The pit was now so deep that they no longer saw the digger. They only saw the red earth he threw up, mounting higher and higher. Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, stood near the edge of the pit because he wanted to take in all that happened. Akogbu had again taken over the digging from Okonkwo. He worked as usual in silence. The neighbors and Okonkwo's wives were now talking. The children had lost interest and were playing. Suddenly, Akogbu sprang to the surface with the agility of a leopard. "It is very near now," he said. "I have felt it." There was immediate excitement, and those who were sitting jumped to their feet. "Call your wife and child," he said to Okonkwo. But Ikwefi and Azima had heard the noise and ran out to see what it was. Akogbu went back into the pit, which was now surrounded by spectators. After a few more hoefuls of earth, he struck the Iuwa. He raised it carefully with the hoe and threw it to the surface. Some women ran away in fear when it was thrown, but they soon returned, and everyone was gazing at the rag from a reasonable distance. A cogbu emerged, and without saying a word or even looking at the spectators, he went to his goatskin bag, took out 2 leaves, and began to chew them. When he had swallowed them, he took up the rag with his left hand and began to untie it. And then the smooth, shiny pebble fell out. He picked it up. "Is this yours?" he asked Azima. "Yes," she replied. All the women shouted with joy because Akwefi's troubles were at last ended. All this had happened more than a year ago, and Azima had not been ill since. And then suddenly she had begun to shiver in the night. Akwefi brought her to the fireplace, spread her mat on the floor, and built a fire. But she had got worse and worse. As she knelt by her, feeling with her palm the wet, burning forehead, she prayed 1,000 times. Although her husband's wives were saying that it was nothing more than Iba, which is flu again, she didn't hear them. Okonkwo returned from the bush carrying on his left shoulder a large bundle of grasses and leaves, roots and barks of medicinal trees and shrubs. He went into Akwefi's hut, put down his load, and sat down. "Give me a pot," he said, "and leave the child alone." Akwefi went to bring the pot, and Okonkwo selected the best from his bundle, in their due proportions, and cut them up. He put them in the pot, and Akwefi poured in some water. "Is that enough?" she asked when she had poured in about half the bowl in the water. "A little more." "I said a little, are you deaf?" Okonkwo roared at her. Again, we're seeing this typical, like, Okonkwo losing his temper really quickly, and he's just very fiery. And of course, the trigger for that is not actually what somebody is doing. It's actually his emotions that he's trying to keep under control. We know he loves Azima. We know he's scared about her condition now. She's sick again. He doesn't want to lose her. She set the pot on the fire, and Okonkwo took up his machete to return to his obi. "You must watch the pot carefully," he said as he went, "and don't allow it to boil over. If it does, its power will be gone." I wonder if the pot is supposed to kind of symbolize Okonkwo here and his fieriness. I'm seeing a lot of kind of foreshadowing about his own self-destruction, which we can kind of see he's on that trajectory. So if the pot is supposed to symbolize him, then it would make sense. If he allows himself to become too fiery, too aggressive, too angry, then he will lose his power. He will lose everything that makes him who he is. He went away to his hut, and Akwefi began to tend to the medicine pot almost as if it was itself a sick child. Her eyes went constantly from Azima to the boiling pot and back to Azima. Okonkwo returned when he felt the medicine had cooked long enough. He looked it over and said it was done. "Bring me a low stool for Azima," he said, "and a thick mat." He took down the pot from the fire and placed it in front of the stool. He then roused Azima and placed her on the stool astride the steaming pot. The thick mat was thrown over both. Azima struggled to escape from the choking and overpowering steam, but she was held down and she started to cry. This sounds like awful. So there's this boiling, steaming pot of water, and he puts her on over top of this boiling, steaming pot, and he throws this thick, heavy blanket over her and the pot. So she's just like in this humid, steaming cave type environment, trying to breathe, and she's really, really sick. So of course she starts crying. When the mat was at last removed, she was drenched in perspiration. Akwefi mopped her with a piece of cloth, and she lay down on a dry mat and was soon asleep. So we know from modern medicine, it sounds like what they did was they actually broke her fever. So although it was painful for her, it's probably a good thing what they did with the steam. Okay, so we are done with chapter 9. Congratulations. I will see you guys soon for chapter 10.